History isn't just kings, wars, and inventions, it's what people did when no one was watching. Across centuries and continents, humans have burned their dead alive, eaten their relatives, and carved pain into devotion. These aren't myths, they're documented. And behind every ritual lies a belief system that made the unthinkable feel necessary. In the center of Tenochtitlan, where the Templo Mayor towered above the crowds, priests would drive obsidian blades into the chests of living captives. With a precision born of training and repetition, they'd reach in and extract the still-beating heart, raising it skyward before casting the body down the temple steps. This wasn't madness, it was religious order. The Aztecs believed that the sun itself needed nourishment in the form of human blood to rise each day. Without it, the universe would collapse. In the 15th century, during the reconsecration of the Great Pyramid, it's said that over 4 days, tens of thousands of victims were sacrificed. Modern scholars debate the scale, but not the reality. What disturbs isn't just the violence, it's the system. This was ritualized, scheduled, expected, a society built around blood. Between the 11th and 19th centuries in northern Japan, a small group of Buddhist monks practiced something unthinkable: self-mummification. Known as Sokushinbutsu, it began with a 1,000-day diet of nuts, roots, and tree bark to eliminate body fat. Then, the monk would consume a toxic tea made from the sap of the urushi tree, preserving the body from within while slowly shutting down organ function. Eventually, the monk would enter a stone tomb, seated in the lotus position, ringing a bell each day to signal he was still alive. When the bell stopped, the tomb was sealed. Only a handful achieved true mummification. Others decayed, failing in both body and faith. In those cases, their remains were quietly buried. The horror wasn't just in the process, it was in the possibility of a failed eternity. The Roman Empire's hunger for spectacle had no age limit. While adult gladiators filled the Colosseum with violence, child gladiators, pueripugiles, were also trained to fight for entertainment. Some were born into slavery, others were orphans or abandoned children sold into the ludus schools. The practice peaked during the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, when mock battles often included children wielding dulled weapons, but not always. Some were pitted against animals, others fought to the death. What began as training could become fatal performance. Roman audiences had a taste for novelty, and child combat was both shocking and alluring. These weren't exceptions. They were part of a culture that merged discipline, blood, and applause. Their names weren't recorded, their deaths unceremonious. The crowd moved on. In parts of India, particularly among certain Hindu castes, the death of a husband once meant more than just mourning. It meant fire. The practice of Sati involved the widow being burned alive on her husband's funeral pyre, sometimes voluntarily, but honestly, often not. Though its origins remain unclear, Sati became more prevalent between the 14th and 18th centuries, especially in Rajput communities. British colonial records describe, well, horrific scenes. Women drugged or tied down, pushed into the flames by relatives or priests. It was framed as devotion, a woman's final proof of loyalty. But it was also about control, erasing widows from the social order and turning them into symbols of chastity through annihilation. The British outlawed it in 1829, but, isolated cases still persisted. Not all rituals are sacred, some are scars passed down. In ancient China, death didn't always come alone. During the Shang and early Zhou dynasties, elite burials often included live human sacrifices. Servants, concubines, and guards were sealed in tombs to accompany their masters into the afterlife. Archaeological digs in Anyang, the capital of the Shang dynasty, which lasted from 1600 to 1046 BCE, revealed rows of skeletons arranged deliberately, some with evidence of bindings. These weren't symbolic figures, they were real people, interred while still breathing. In some cases, they were expected to drink poison. In others, they were simply sealed in chambers with no escape. The belief was clear. The emperor's domain extended beyond death. Even in silence, power had to be obeyed. Later dynasties shifted to using clay figurines and statues, but the blood-soaked legacy, well, it remained beneath the soil. If you're still here, you're the kind of person who doesn't look away. So, consider subscribing. Dark Chronicles exists to bring you the facts most people won't talk about. Among the Fore people of Papua New Guinea and the Yanomami of the Amazon, death triggered a form of communion almost unimaginable to outsiders' endo-cannibalism. In these cultures, consuming the flesh or ashes of deceased relatives was not grotesque, it was reverent. The belief was that through ingestion, the soul could continue to live within the tribe. In the case of the Fore, women and children were often the ones who ate the brain. Tragically, this practice led to an epidemic of kuru, a prion disease similar to mad cow disease, which spread rapidly in the 20th century. Victims lost coordination, speech, and eventually, their lives. Among the Yanomami, cremated bones were crushed and mixed with banana soup, grief was swallowed, death internalized, love and decay fused. Deep beneath the Capuchin monastery in Palermo, Sicily, over 1,200 mummified bodies line the walls of the catacombs. It began in the late 1500s as a burial site for monks, but quickly became a macabre status symbol. Nobles, children, professionals, they paid to be preserved, dressed, and displayed after death. Families were expected to maintain the bodies, bringing food, changing clothes, even speaking to them. In return, the dead were believed to offer blessings or intercede with God. One of the last and most haunting is Rosalia Lombardo, a 2-year-old girl embalmed in 1920. Her preservation is so perfect she's called Palermo's Sleeping Beauty. In some cases, corpses held letters or contracts, unread pacts between the living and the dead. Death here was not an end, it was a negotiation. The Scythians were nomadic warriors of the Eurasian steppes, active between the 9th and 1st centuries BCE. Herodotus, the Greek historian, described a chilling ritual. After battle, Scythian warriors would drink the blood of the first enemy they killed. It was a form of spiritual purification, a way to bind the soul of the slain to the victor. Skulls were turned into drinking cups, scalps worn as trophies, and severed hands counted for glory. In some accounts, they even tanned human skin to cover dagger sheaths or sew into cloaks, turning the body of the enemy into a literal garment of war. Archaeological finds confirm many of these elements. For the Scythians, blood wasn't just symbolic, it was wearable. Mayan elites didn't just wear their status, they etched it into their flesh. Among noble families, especially between 200 and 900 CE, facial mutilation was a rite of beauty, honor, and spiritual power. Children had their skulls bound with boards to produce elongated foreheads. Noses were reshaped, teeth filed to points or inlaid with jade. Scarification rituals were common, using bone needles and obsidian blades, but the most extreme offerings came through self-wounding, piercing the tongue or even the genitals to bleed for the gods. Blood was seen as the essence of life and pain, a channel to the divine. These weren't punishments, they were transformations. The body was both altar and sacrifice. Few images are more haunting than the so-called blood eagle, a method of Viking execution described in a handful of medieval sources. According to the sagas, the victim's ribs were severed from the spine and spread outward like wings. The lungs were then pulled through the openings while the victim still lived. It was said to be used against traitors or enemies of the Norse gods. But the earliest descriptions come from 13th century skaldic poetry, written long after the Viking Age ended, raising doubts about whether it ever truly happened. Whether real or imagined, the symbolism is unmistakable. It was not just death, it was desecration. A ritual made to be remembered, even if it never was. Some of these rituals lasted centuries, others vanished in a generation, but none of them were isolated. They were part of functioning societies, empires, religions, tribes, where horror wore the mask of duty or faith. What's disturbing isn't just the pain, it's how normal it once was and how easily it could be again. History doesn't warn, it remembers. And if we dig deep enough, we often find that the darkest stories aren't the ones that were hidden. They're the ones that were celebrated.